Welcome to our new podcast, But Is It Funny?, which puts comedy criticism in the spotlight. We're really excited to get talking. And who's doing the talking? Myself, Brian Logan. I'm also here today, and indeed most of these episodes, with Jamal Khadar and Suchandrika Chakrabarti, both comedy eminences. Is that fair to say? Hello, Suchandrika. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Eminence might be a bit much, but so keep losing competitions.
Oh,
Yes.
You'll always be eminent to me.
Thank you.
Jamal, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'll go with comedy enthusiast or something like that.
and might I ask, how has your week been in comedy? Have you seen or done or enjoyed comedy in any particular way this last week?
So I saw 2 shows at the Bill Murray on Sunday night, which was really nice. It felt like getting right back into live comedy. And while I was watching the first show and then chatting to my friends afterwards, I booked a ticket for the second one. So the first one was stand-up philosophy. So you get 4 comedians, they come on, and they were doing the theme of expectations. They sort of take an angle. So the first one was Sarah Barron. She was absolutely brilliant. And we sort of wondered how approachable it would be, but it's much more about the laughs, and it was really fun. And then the second one was Gigglers, which was Catherine Bohart's like online gig that she was doing during the pandemic for other comedians who had lost all of their gigs. And they did a live version, and it had Helen Bauer, Celia A.B., and that was really brilliant. And I was surprised. I don't know why I was, but Catherine Bohart struck me as an absolutely terrifying MC. Like, she would get you. And I don't know why I didn't assume she would be like that. So it was quite fun having that kind of MC, but I was very scared. So
right, so you're thoroughly back in the world of live comedy.
Yeah.
The Zoom era feels long forgotten. Jamal, how's about yourself? Have you been engaging?
Yeah, a little bit, but I'd say in terms of comedy, my week has mostly been defined by my brother, who sends me obscure Instagram comedians that he finds, and just reminds me of that world of comedy. And so I can't remember any of their names, but the latest one includes someone who has a particular kind of marching band humor. So he records himself over live footage of like American college marching bands, and pretends to conduct them, and makes very strange and specific jokes about that. And then there's another one who watches who's American, but watches international cooking videos. And the premise tends to be that in the beginning, everything's going fine. And it's like, oh, you're cooking chicken. This is amazing. This looks really good. And then they do something that's, different for him. And he freaks out for the rest of the video and blows a whistle at them like a referee. So yeah, I'll forward those to you guys if you're interested.
I just feel like not another marching band comedian. Are there no new ideas?
I didn't know about your brother's list. How do I make your brother's list? Is he booking at the moment, Jamal? Just send him an email.
He should do an email. I'll get him to do like a Substack or something.
I'm looking for
like
gigs, so
You better be careful though. You don't want Jamal referring to you as an obscure Instagram comedian, Suchandrika.
I wish.
Well, my own week in comedy has been fairly prosaic by comparison. I was also at a live gig on Sunday night, but whereas you were down and dirty at the Bill Murray, I was at the Royal and Downgate in Northampton watching Russell Brand. So like, go figure. And somebody asked me the other day, how was Russell Brand? And I went about 15 seconds without speaking, which kind of pretty much tells you all you need to know about Russell Brand.
Has he mellowed out? I feel like he's mellowed out a bit from 5 years, 6 years ago.
Well, depends on your definition of mellow. I mean, he's very spiritual. He's a spiritual gentleman these days, and he's also a father. So these things have taken some of the edge, I suppose, off his kind of priapic, ego-driven comedy. But that's all still in the mix. Yeah, it's. I mean, they're unlike anybody else's gigs in their mixture of kind of neo-religiosity and egomaniacal humor. But he still has a certain je ne sais quoi. There's the large queue of people lining up to have a selfie with him at the interval would surely testify to. So yes, I refer you to the Guardian for my more articulate remarks on this phenomenon. But yeah, anyway, we've got more important conversations than the one about Russell Brand to be having. Suchandrika, we're going to start with a topic that you brought to today's But Is It Funny table, which is that you were interested in talking about sad things in comedy, with reference, I think, both to live comedy and to stuff we find on the small screen. Is that right?
Yes, I feel like since the pandemic has been lifted, and also with Zoom gigs in the pandemic, that uh people have been bringing sort of sad things, feeling, you know, weird, disorientated in the pandemic, feelings of grief even, to their comedy, to their 1 hour shows. And then in terms of TV shows, I've been thinking about Ladhood and Alma's Not Normal and Back to Life, which are all on BBC iPlayer, and also Ted Lasso, which there's been a backlash to the backlash of Ted Lasso being this feel-good comedy, but actually it's taken this really dark turn, and it feels quite psychologically earned. I won't go too far into it, but it's just one of these Emmys, and it seems like it's going quite an interesting direction. But with the other shows, I wanted to think about, like with Ladhood, for instance, how Liam Williams uses his younger self and uses nostalgia to comment on his current self, who's having relationship problems, who has anger issues. But at heart, it's a very sad story, because it seems like that character hasn't changed, and you wonder if they're capable of change. So in amongst all the nostalgia, which also makes you feel old, and that is sad in its own way, I also feel like he was at school about the same time as me. Yeah, there's this kind of sadness around, is this character capable of change? And then with Back to Life, it's obviously a story of someone who's in prison, you know, for the first 18 years of their adulthood, and there's questions over whether Daisy Haggard's character, the main character, should have been in prison, you know, what the crime was. And so it's interesting with the second series, they've gone for a bit of a tightly plotted kind of who done it kind of situation there, which I didn't expect to see, and it makes the second season feel very different, and sadness isn't kind of the overwhelming tone as much as it's quite tense, and you're in the edge of your seat a bit more. And then lastly, I was watching Almost Not Normal, which is the new sitcom from Sophie Willam. And it's about Alma, who she spent some of her childhood in care. She's had a difficult childhood. Her grandma raised her for some of it. Her mum has been addicted to drugs, has not been able to be a mother. And it's a really arresting combination of extremely heartbreaking stuff, actually. And at times you kind of stop and think, this feels like a drama. This doesn't feel like comedy at all, but I wouldn't say that it detracts from it at all. I'd say it gives her character a backstory, but also gives the supporting characters a backstory. And so rather than having these kind of two-dimensional characters, in terms of a mum and a grandma, you get a feeling of why these women have become the people they are, and kind of the forces around them that shape them, and also the generational problems that are compounding. So it actually does a lot of work in this kind of 6-episode BBC sitcom. So yeah, I've been kind of trying to figure out how to do those things together, I suppose, for myself by watching all these things. I wonder what you guys think.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. One of the things that I'm curious about is what immediately comes to mind is that when I think of stand-up getting a bit sad or bringing up difficult things and making light of them, is that it doesn't always feel, I suppose, healthy. Whereas when there's more of a narrative and it's a TV show, it can feel a little bit more cathartic, or like maybe the writers are working through something by looking back in Ladhood, for example. And it feels like maybe they're working on something. But does that feel like a fair division to you? Is that true of the TV shows you're talking about? Does it feel a little healthier than it might do, a little bit less awkward than it might do in stand-up?
So I have, because I only started in comedy in January 2020. So I have very recently been to those very early stage open mic gigs where people are doing their first 5 minutes. And I have definitely seen people who needed to go to therapy, or taking that story to people who would give them a safe space to share it. So I think sometimes people look at a difficult story or trauma from their past and they think, where can I extract the comedy? And the answer might be, sure, maybe there, but can you give it 10 years? And it feels like with sitcom development, obviously the commissioning process, the writing process can take so long that it is very processed. But a stand-up could go and do it tomorrow, and they're right in front of you, and you can feel the energy. And if the energy is like, oh, this is raw, the audience gets very scared, and they don't laugh. So I think, yeah, there's a definite difference there.
Well, I'm alarmed to think of people at open mic nights doing traumedy. I mean, I'm familiar with the phenomenon in live comedy, but mainly in a sort of, Edinburgh Fringe show context, where obviously it's been a pretty well documented phenomenon with Nanette, for example, or with Richard Gadd's Monkey See, Monkey Do. Was it the one that won the Perrier Award, which is about sexual assault? But yeah, those, you know, in those contexts, it was probably closer to your experiences of watching these sadcoms on TV, and that they were. I don't think you'd watch those shows and thought they were quite as raw and unprocessed. But yeah, the idea that people are bringing that kind of material to the open mic table is that feels like a challenging context for it. But when you say you're watching these shows, Suchandrika, partly with the intention of like downloading intel or techniques for your own work, what are you thinking about incorporating it into your live performance? That some of those kind of tones.
So I did an hour show this summer called I Miss Amy Winehouse. So from like the title, you can tell there's stuff about grief in it. And so for me, I wanted to know how you do an hour show, how you do sort of elements of drama, elements of difficult things, but it's like 95% comedy. And also, how do you market that kind of show, which is probably something I will get into in later episodes talking about comedy and theatre. But there's this idea that audiences kind of want comedy and they're more likely to go to comedy. And if you name something theatre, they might think like, oh, do I want to do this? So what percentage comedy does it have to be a comedy? And what percentage drama can you drop in? How many blackouts can I have in it before it's no longer a comedy? And it's that kind of thing. Like I had to kind of learn from watching other people doing it during the pandemic, because obviously I couldn't go and watch anyone do it live. And it's all a matter of taste, maybe, or how it makes you feel at the end of it.
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent, I haven't been to that many live shows since everything has been opening up again properly, but I wonder to what extent audiences, after having had a difficult year or two, are maybe more open to it or more used to raw or more difficult or more sad material. But I definitely recognize what you're saying in that people may be more drawn to a comedy show where they can go and kind of switch off and laugh or whatever. Whereas if the word theater is in there, it becomes a little bit more like, am I emotionally ready for this? What can I expect? How kind of difficult is this going to be to watch? But yeah, if you look at the TV that people are watching and the TV shows that are winning awards and things like that, I feel like that kind of mix of comedy and trauma is becoming more popular is a strange word, but becoming more common. So yeah, I wonder how it'll transfer to stand-up stages, or if it will slowly start to transfer to stand-up stages, and what audiences expect.
It's interesting you refer to it as the type of TV comedy that's winning awards, because I think part of the cynicism in terms of how it manifested in live comedy was that these dead dad shows, they called them in Edinburgh, didn't they? They were like award bait. You were far more likely to win an award. You know, it's the same with it's that cliche that's been around about Oscars for years, that if you played someone who's experienced trauma, or indeed someone with a disability in some instances, this was like a shortcut to getting award glory. I mean, what do you think's driving it, but across the live and TV scene? Do you think that like the sadcom is a new phenomenon, or a phenomenon that's intensifying, or do you think is it a these things go in waves situation?
So I actually referenced the dead dad. Sorry, did you want to go?
No, go for it. Go.
I actually referenced the 45-minute dead dad trope in my show, and actually I found that people weren't that familiar with it, but it was like Camden Fringe and Brighton Fringe, so it's not the same audience, and it's a pandemic. But I think you get lots of actors doing stand-up and possibly stand-ups themselves. You want to show range, maybe. And Jamal mentioned, like, would I put sort of more sad things, more difficult things into stand-up? I think 5 or 10 minutes, probably even up to half an hour. It's very hard to have shades of light and dark, because you can't contextualize it enough for the audience to know you're okay. So I think when it's short form, you've got to go for the laughs. You can have storytelling, but you've got to make them laugh. But when you've got an hour, I didn't understand how I keep it just one tone for an hour. And I felt like an example of stand-up that I felt was one tone for an hour. I watched Phil Wang's special on Netflix recently. I think it's called Philly Philly Wang Wang, which is incredible. It's the best. Yeah, and it's really funny, and I really enjoyed it, and I like him as a comic. But I did find he didn't sort of have a build up of emotions and then a sort of come down, and he didn't want to do that. It's not his style really, and that's fine. But I find that's what you get in 1 hour specials a lot more often. Trying to think of an example at the top of my head, and I can't. Oh no, I really can't. But there will be other 1 hour specials out there where they take you on more of an emotional journey. And I guess it depends on the story you have to tell and how much you want it to be different from your last show, like if this is your career. So maybe that's what's at play with this.
Yeah, I mean, there are comedians who are very resentful of the idea that you should, whether it's a 10-minute slot or a 55-minute show, that you should be obliged to kind of wear your heart on your sleeve. There are comedians who think that is antithetical to the whole art form of comedy. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think when I find myself watching an hour show, you certainly want some variation of tone or sort of some emotional heft or something. And I suppose there are some brilliant comedians who can find ways to vary the tone while still keeping it well within the sort of orbit of just silly or just funny. But yeah, in terms of, it certainly does feel in a telly context, all those shows you just mentioned, it does feel as if post Fleabag, which probably accelerated the phenomenon, the purely silly or purely funny sitcoms are far thinner on the ground than they have been in the past.
Yeah, I also think there's an interesting thing about endings. If I think about the darker comedy TV show endings, like I May Destroy You, for example, they have maybe more of an opportunity there to leave it on this very ambivalent note. And, they've taken you through a journey and they can kind of end without really releasing any tension. Whereas I feel like with stand-up, and I know someone that recently also did a 1 hour set, which had some darker things in it, she felt a lot of pressure to kind of end on a more positive note or reassure the audience in some way that, okay, but I'm doing a little better now, or, I think I'll get there. And I haven't seen many specials that go to a more difficult or darker place and then just kind of leave it there on that ambivalent note. And I think that's quite hard to do. I don't know if you felt with your heavier material, you felt like you had to bring it back to comedy for the ending.
Oh, 100%, definitely. You have to let them know you're okay. And I think also, so the show is about Amy Winehouse, but also about me. And so Amy Winehouse's story does not end well. She died at the age of 27. And so there is a bit from the documentary that Asif Kapadia made about her in 2015. So it's all found footage of her. It's been very early in her career. And she says, I know my songs are sad. So I put a punchline in each song. And I literally put that on a screen behind me and say, right, I'm going to do that for you. I don't want you to walk out of this theatre feeling sad. So for me, it's always this audience first thing of how are they feeling? How are they feeling the whole time? Because I think that's how people choose what they go and watch. They read the marketing blurb. More than anything, is how am I going to feel? Is this a good way to spend an hour? Because how am I going to feel at the end of it? I do think that's a driving concern.
It's a traditional genre marker, isn't it, for comedy, that even Shakespeare ended his comedies with a dance. If it ends with a dance, it's a comedy and not a tragedy.
Yeah, I break dance at the end of mine. It's great.
I'm a great believer that essentially all works of entertainment should just end with a dance. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole conversation that blossoms from this one about the degree to which a thing might be comedy or might have to relinquish its claims on comedy altogether. I mean, you're mentioning I May Destroy You. Is that officially classified as a comedy? I mean, it is, and likewise, the Hannah Gadsby show on the net, the most frequent criticism applied to it was it's not comedy at all. Whereas in fact, what tends to be the case is the most interesting artworks are the ones that blast these definitions into outer space, like both those shows, for example.
Yeah, I don't know why I did that automatically. Now that I'm kind of questioning it, but I agree. Yeah, the more interesting shows, it's kind of hard to pin down. And for some reason, in my mind, I put I May Destroy You, and with other shows that are kind of humorous but not, I was thinking of Fleabag, Atlanta. But yeah, maybe thinking back now, maybe I May Destroy You isn't quite as comedic as the other ones. Is that am I just questioning myself now?
No, I think you're probably right. But how it was, I mean, the comedian Will Adamsdale, who I know a little, always rolls his eyes when this conversation about labels gets brought up, and with a great big "who cares" shrug. I mean, really, who cares what things are labeled? But yeah, I don't know. In the drop-down menu on iPlayer, is I May Destroy You under comedy or is it under drama? I have no idea. Probably on both pages.
It's got that dramedy kind of thing. I think the BBC, there's a BBC writers' room now, which is both comedy and drama together, which is kind of acknowledging the fact that people are kind of putting them together. And I think Michaela Cole has said of I May Destroy You that there's humor in everything, even in the depths that she sort of plumbs in that show, which is like very personal and very raw. And also because Chewing Gum, her first show, is hilarious and ridiculous, and she draws these very funny outsized characters, particularly her lead character that she plays. So she has made comedy, she's been in comedy, that's kind of her kind of branding. But now when she's made her own show, it's got elements of more things. And you know, Jamal, when you were speaking about the endings, I was thinking of Catastrophe, which I think people could probably go and find on, I think Amazon Prime probably, but it was on BBC originally. So it's Rob Delaney, Sharon Horgan, and that ends very ambiguously. And that was always a comedy, which was always balanced on the edge of, are these two going to stay together, and what's going to happen to their children? And it was really well done, and it was almost a bit too real, but it was definitely a comedy, but it did not end with a happy 2.4, you know, picture in a frame or something like that. It was like, are they going to be okay? So that, yeah, that really came to mind. That's a bit, that veers into dramedy kind of territory, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I know that it's a subject that you're interested in returning to in a future podcast, Suchandrika, about that comedy theatre distinction. So we should probably knock that conversation on the head in case we start straying into that territory. But yeah, it feels like we're all interested in the phenomenon, and we should recommend some of the series that you mentioned. Alma's Not Normal and Back to Life. And I know you were interested in Lady Baby, which is also on iPlayer. So yeah, we heartily recommend those. But for now, we're going to move on. Jamal, we should turn to you. I know that you've got a topic that you would like us to discuss today, and that is, well, on one level, the success of the Netflix sketch show, I Think You Should Leave, with Tim Robinson. You know, and beyond that, perhaps if we have time, a wider discussion really about the state of sketch comedy on television, you know, specifically through a UK lens, because there's been some discussion about the strength of British sketch comedy. But yeah, what is it about I Think You Should Leave that made you feel you just had to tell us about it?
That's a good place to start. Well, actually, the best place to start is to explain a little bit more about it, and then I'll answer that question straight away. So I Think You Should Leave, yeah, it's a Netflix sketch series with Tim Robinson, who is formerly a SNL cast member and writer on SNL. And he also starred in, and I think co-wrote a show called The Detroiters, a comedy. And I Think You Should Leave is in its second series now, which was released, I think, a couple of months ago, maybe even a month ago. And the reason I want to talk about it is I think it's the first, and if anyone listening or if either of you guys are deeply into sketch comedy, please forgive me for what I'm about to say. But I'm going to try and make the case that it's the first sketch show in a while that people seem to be really excited about. And I think it's transcended the typical comedy audience, maybe in the same way that Bo Burnham's Inside has, that we talked about last time the three of us spoke. And yeah, I kind of wanted to get into why that is. Is it because it's modernizing the format in a meaningful way? Or is it because it's just kind of tapping into a certain type of mentality or character that's very relevant for the moment? I think a bit of both, but I'm curious to see what you guys think. My overview, I guess, is that I really enjoyed it. I think it subverts the rules of and kind of tools of sketch comedy in ways that are new, or at the very least plays on our expectations of sketch comedy and how those have been built up. And it's very surprising. And then I think it also satirizes, but neatly plays into a lot of our online behavior and kind of, you know, pokes fun at a lot of kind of internet culture. And the strongest evidence, I think, that it's taking us somewhere new is the way that people have responded to it online. I think the kind of fandom and fan culture around it's really interesting. And I have a couple of those examples. But maybe the best place to kind of start and get into it is how it may or may not be playing with / subverting the rules of sketch comedy. I'm not a massive sketch person, but I'm a big improv fan, as you guys know, and a lot of the kind of tools and formats of sketch comedy cross over into improv. So from kind of a technical point of view, I'm interested in sketch in that way. Um, and of course, I'm aware that every great sketch or sketch show kind of plays with the rules of sketch in some way and surprises us in some way. But I'd like to argue, I guess, that I think You Should Leave takes that a little bit further or adds a new twist to it. I think it's kind of playing on our, dare I say, tiredness of sketch comedy and so sort of our very set expectations of sketch, and kind of playing with or making fun of those, because it takes, all the sketches seem to take place in these very typical kind of obvious sketch settings. It's always like a corporate office or a lunch meeting or a birthday party, kind of a very, here's a standard normal situation. And it has the same kind of game as any sketch where there's a character with a strange point of view, or there's something strange going on that then gets heightened. But I think it always takes it to either a really absurd or surreal place, or it changes the rules of the game in kind of interesting ways. It constantly kind of changes what the game is, or just tone shifts in a way that I don't think I've seen a lot of before in sketch comedy. So it could start out as a very kind of everyday situation, and then move into something which feels more like a music video, or shift into something which feels more like a really sincere drama, and then switch back really quickly. And I think that's quite modern. And to give a kind of clear example of that, I don't know if you guys remember either the sloppy steak sketch or the birthday party. Yeah, sloppy steak is a good example, in that, it starts out with a character that has a strange point of view, and then the rest of the regular people are reacting to him, but then slowly switch to being on his side. And I think that's kind of a classic way that the sketches can be quite unpredictable. I've got a lot more to say about it in terms of online behavior and stuff, but how do you guys feel about the case I'm making so far?
Well, I'm persuaded by you, Jamal, as ever. I'm persuaded by your eloquence. No, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's terrific, and it seems to me it's. I mean, I suppose where I would like asterisk what you're saying is that, I spoke to a bunch of sketch comics, UK sketch comics a few years ago now. It feels like we've been having conversations about the state of British sketch probably over 45 years since the last series of Monty Python. But and this, if that was 5 years ago, maybe that piece now is talking to like people from Sheeps and people from Beasts and The Pin, these kind of acts. And it did feel like there was a moment in British comedy 5 or 6 years ago where there was like super creative stuff happening in sketch, but it was only happening live. It wasn't. And so that was part of the dialogue. Really, it was like one of the reasons that people were being so creative with sketches, because they had despaired of anyone commissioning a sketch on British television ever again. And in a certain sense, that was quite liberating, because there was no need to sort of demonstrate their TV friendliness. They could just start like being much more creative with what they were doing. But certainly it'll be interesting to speak to you about what you define as the conventions of sketch comedy that you think. I think You Should Leave is exploding. But certainly at the time they were articulating like a real fatigue with get to the punchline and then blackout, and the whole like the discourse of hit and miss around sketch comedy, which like is the worst enemy of any sketch comedian. So I feel like even in the context of like relatively small time live British comedy, there have been some really creative gestures made in sketch comedy in the last decade, but none of them have been given the chance to show what they can do on TV, or at least not beyond pilot stage. But even taking all that into account, I think You Should Leave. I agree with everything you say about it. It feels to me its claims to like uniqueness are to do with the degree at which it sort of maps online behavior into the real world. It feels to me that as you've articulated, how the sketches like get to what you might consider to be their natural conclusion and then pivot in really surprising directions, and really like go on beyond the point at which some people might think actually that joke is now long dead, in order to get to the kind of new tiers of funny beyond that. And also the length of the episodes is interesting. It's interesting that they come in at like 16 minutes or so forth, which, if you bear in mind that perennial hit and miss criticism, it's quite an interesting way of offsetting that possible line of attack. But yeah, I'm really enjoying what I've seen of it. I've probably seen about half of the available episodes, and looking forward to the next half.
They're going to have to edit this out, but I do have to grab a converter cable because my my mic plug is taking away from my laptop battery being charged, and my laptop's about to crash. So sorry, editors. And then Suchandrika.
I see no reason to edit this out. This is gripping content.
This is the raw content people want.
Absolutely.
I'll be
the
right
front
back.
line of podcasting.
Should give him a sec to come back.
I suppose so.
Yeah.
Don't have a conversation without him.
You can't leave him out of the chat about the sketch show.
Have you got you should have a hostile opinion, Suchandrika.
I know. Do you know what? I didn't enjoy the first series. But I think but I love it now. And I have a journey to share with you guys. So it'll be an emotional journey.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
That I'll do in like 30 seconds. Yeah, I think when it started getting memed, I think he does images pretty better than any sketch show that I've seen. And the images make it very meme friendly and very internet friendly. And then you start going, what's that image about? And you want to watch it again. So that's generally it. But
that's interesting.
Yeah. I probably just wasn't in the mood for it. The first series, did it come out in the pandemic? Like the height of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand. I probably took an episode or two to be lulled, because he doesn't like, he's not warm, is he? So you don't immediately engage to him because it doesn't do warmth, and there's a lot of like kind of farting and coarse humor, which is not particularly my bag. So yeah, some of that stuff's faintly off-putting, but eventually you realize, okay, there's much more going on than just that.
I suppose he's actually asking for quite a discerning viewer, isn't he? So he's come from SNL. He's got a high level of how to write sketch, how to play sketch, how to subvert it. And he's kind of expecting like a viewer who's up there. And I wouldn't say that I am necessarily. So it took me a couple of viewings. Because we don't have a lot of sketch in this country. When I think of sketch shows, I think Smack the Pony, Goodness Gracious Me, fast shows. I'm thinking turn of the century when I was growing up. And there hasn't been loads in the noughties, has there? Which is a shame. We don't have an SNL type show here. That's less about the personalities of the groups and more about you pay your dues and then you're a movie star, off you go. But we don't have that here. Richard Curtis could set one up, maybe. Why not? Hello. We were actually saying really mean things behind your back. We stop now.
I heard it all. You were talking about the pipeline from kind of improv to sketch to TV, or.
Well, I'll start with. So I have to be honest with you. When I saw the first series of I Think You Should Leave Now on Netflix, I did not like it. But I'll take you on an emotional journey. Stay with me. So I didn't enjoy it, but I think it was like height of the pandemic. There's a lot going on. I don't think I got it. I don't think I'm that well versed in sketch. And then I started seeing the hot dog man online, who's come to become a shorthand for, I think probably like maybe Trump's type thing of like big business going, hey, who's ruining the world? It's that guy, while they're dumping oil in the sea. Like it's become the shorthand for this very sort of the things that people online who are anti-capitalist want to rail against. So I think I started seeing these images online and it made me want to go back. So maybe he does images better than other sketch shows that come to mind for me. And that makes it very memeable, makes it very internet friendly. And then when the second series came out, I loved it immediately. And for me, it's the one where he goes undercover and they put on prosthetics on him, but they go wild. And so he becomes this weird uncanny valley Frankenstein monster thing. And he just has this level of existential despair. And I think sometimes he can marry this kind of genre of, undercover, secret boss type thing, which they've done on SNL with Adam Driver and a kind of Star Wars thing. And that was pretty funny. But this pushes it further and makes a main character depressed. And somehow that's funnier. And again, there's a lot of sadness in I Think You Should Leave, and a lot of dysfunction.
Yeah.
but yet, and I think the internet, Twitter humor, drill Twitter humor, so like the Twitter account drill, DRIL, has that kind of humor where it's about existential despair, but you push it so far. Like when he says, "Oh my, someone help me budget, my family are dying." This is a wint, a drill. This is a drill tweet, and he says, "Someone help me budget, my family are dying," and then it turns out he's spending $3,500 on candles a month, and so it's like you can point out what's wrong very easily, and that's the joke. But his persona is this very sad person. It's actually really, yeah, it links back into the sadness and comedy, and Tim Robinson clearly knows as an SNL alumni what the rules of sketch are. I feel like he expects the audience to have a good level of knowledge, which might be why I didn't understand the first series on my first viewing. And then he can play with the rules because he knows them inside out. And I just think it's some of the best comedy I've seen in the last few years. It's fantastic.
That is a real journey. Yeah.
No, I've been through it all.
I think you're right about the sadness, actually, and I think that's one of the things. On the one hand, his characters are everything that's irritating about some people that we find irritating online or in our lives. But on the other hand, there is something touching sometimes, or something maybe relatable, or something that we all have that we don't like. And they're often characters that are trying quite hard and really want you to understand, but just don't know when to stop and keep failing. And this is an extreme example. I think normally it's more subtle, but the one sketch I think of is the haunted house sketch in season 2, where there's the one character who keeps asking really inappropriate questions, and it heightens in the typical way a sketch does, and he just doesn't get what's wrong with the questions. But then at the end, his mom comes to pick him up and it's like, "Oh, did you make any friends today?" And it's barely funny. It's just kind of downbeat and sincere, and it's funny because it's maybe a bit over the top, but yeah, the characters are often complex and kind of sad at the same time as being irritating and incredibly frustrating. And I do think season 2 was better than season 1, and they managed to hone in on the parts that are really funny and that kind of stick in your head. So I kind of understand that journey. And I think I was kind of on board with half of the sketches in season 1, and then have gone back to watch them. But they are just incredibly rewatchable. And one of the to your point about internet culture, one of the fun things I've seen is on Reddit, there's kind of a whole thread, a whole community dedicated to the show, and they only speak in quotes. It's kind of funny to see, like, everything anyone posts, which is often about the show or how the show bears relevance to something that's in the news, like the hot dog person, and everyone else just responds in the form of the different characters. And they do things like coming up with the internet search history of one of the characters, or they really like let them live on in these different ways, which I think is really interesting, and it shows how well suited it is to online.
Well, that's interesting, Jamal, because one of the conversations we had leading up to this recording, you shared with us this article from the Telegraph about the supposed woes of British sketch comedy. And one of the several scattershot theories forwarded was that sketch went out of fashion because it became like catchphrase comedy, and because it got reduced to the point where it was just coming up with a catchphrase, and then your fans would repeat that ad nauseam in the playground. Or I can also testify at theatres. I've been to a fair few live shows by famous sketch acts that just become a sort of call and response loving, the comedy value of which is almost nil. So the idea was forwarded that maybe finally that had sort of discredited sketch as being a kind of fairly lowest common denominator, bandying around of catchphrases. But presumably you would argue that that's not quite what's going on that Reddit forum.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting tension, because that I can see that argument completely, and I think it's interesting that in most of those sketches, they're reoccurring characters, right? They're people that you see again and again. In the kind of older British sketches you're talking about, are characters you see again and again, and you're expecting the line to come out, yeah, but no, but yeah, but or whatever it is. whereas in I Think You Should Leave, they're often one-off characters that have a lot that share a lot in their points of view, but they're often one-off characters. And maybe there's something like a heightened or almost absurdist way that they're doing some of the catchphrases, or what could be the catchphrases or kind of takeaway lines. And there's this brilliant New Yorker article that called I Think You Should Leave is a Love Language. And it talks about the way that that Tim Robinson's characters kind of deliver words deliver sentences in the strangest ways, and they're like, it's almost Shakespearean sometimes, the kind of awkwardness and the strange delivery of lines, and that makes me think that possibly that's them thinking about typical catchphrase sketch comedy and just really dialing that up to a to an extreme or surreal extent. But yeah, it's an interesting tension that this is kind of new but familiar.
Mm-hmm. And does it feel to either of you like a show that is very much of its present moment? I mean, we've sort of alluded to the currents that run between internet culture and this particular sketch show. Does it feel like it could only have been made now, or that it's telling us something about the moment that we're living in?
Yeah, I think.
You carry on.
No, I just went. Go ahead.
Not to bring up that guy again, but it does feel like a post-Trump comedy where something's wrong in the world. And possibly our future might always feel like this, because there are many things that are coming up for us that are bad. But yeah, it feels like there's an elephant in the room that no one's mentioning, or they're trying to mention, but it's in this convoluted way. It's comedy about bleak stuff, like really bleak stuff, maybe. And this thing about pushing things too far and not getting each other. I mean, that feels like a forum, or it feels like Twitter right now. Maybe those things would improve. But yeah, it does feel of the moment, but it could be that this moment is our future. Mm-hmm. We'll cheer up in the next question, won't we?
Yeah, it feels it feels like he's enacting like lack of inhibition and failure to read social cues and lots of the things that we would associate perhaps with people who spend too much time on a screen and not enough time interacting with their fellow human beings.
Yeah, and the other thing I think about when you ask that question is when his characters get kind of desperate and start either gaslighting or crying, or desperately trying to explain themselves in such an over the top and clearly kind of manipulated way. That I think I guess this is partly drawing on an article here, but somebody drew a line between that and the way that online people can jump between being the bad guy or the aggressor and the victim, and try and, when they get desperate, just try and switch the story up and be like, make a plea to people and show their kind of vulnerable side. And that those are for me some of the funniest moments or recognizable moments, and that feels very of the moment somehow as well. And there's also something, maybe we can draw a line between this and Bo Burnham's Inside, in that they both are kind of mocking performance or facade, but also playing into them neatly. Both are criticizing internet culture, but creating internet culture at the same time.
Jamal, just on the haunted house sketch that you mentioned, which is, it's a brilliant ending. It's a sad ending when he comes out and his mum says, "Did you make friends?" And you realise it was an act. And you're right, this performance is in a lot of the sketches. And if we think about the pandemic, we lived on those screens, and then people had a kind of performance where they weren't their real selves, but they were doing everything through the screen, from work to meeting new people to comedy that was being done on live streams. We were kind of all performing a 2D version of ourselves through the pandemic, and that was better or worse for some of us. It took its toll on some of us. It was leading to burnout as well. And it feels like these characters, especially in like the workplace situations, they are performing a work version of themselves. And we've had to do that like in our bedrooms during the pandemic. So I think there's that part of it as well, that we are under the same strains as some of these characters, even though they're outlandish.
Yeah, and that's been heightened in the last year or two. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I sense we're about to move on. So before we do, I just want to quickly say to your earlier point, Brian, yeah, I should add a huge asterisk to what I said in the beginning and say that I'm talking about mainstream TV sketch culture. I don't want to be guilty of what a lot of people accuse the certain Telegraph article of doing. Yeah, there's loads of interesting sketch culture out there, off TV, on radio, in podcasts. But I think in terms of TV, I personally have sensed like a bit of a tiredness with sketch comedy. And I think this is the first kind of time I see people refreshed and excited about TV sketch comedy.
Yeah, sure. I totally hear you. And let's face it, you can set your watch now for the onslaught of new TV sketch comedy that will be trying to cash in on its success. The cycle will begin again. I'll see you in 10 years for the backlash against the new wave of TV sketch comedy. But yeah, you're right that we are about to move on, because I'm conscious of time, and that we've got one more item to speak about, which was teed up nicely by Suchandrika a minute ago when she mentioned the Zoom era in comedy history, which we may still be living through. Watch this space. But yeah, this is one that I was interested in discussing today, partly because it does feel as if live comedy is obviously returning. We're maybe moving towards the latter stages of the I loathe even to jinx that by finishing that sentence. Maybe we're moving to the latter stages of the COVID era. But yeah, I remembered a gig by the comedian Jen Brister that I watched in the middle of the lockdown. She introduced her set by going, "What is this? What are we doing? This is our career now," she said. She was performing on Zoom, obviously, and of all the Zoom comedy sets that I watched, this was one of the funniest, and probably because it was one of the truest, because it blew the gaff on the idea that this, which in her case was sitting alone in her broom cupboard performing comedy to a laptop, was in any way an adequate substitute for stand-up as we used to know it. So yeah, I saw Jen Brister again last week, as it happened, at Shakespeare's Globe. She was still delivering that great bit about the indignities of comedy as video conferencing. And she was on the same bill as Dara O'Brien, who became the latest in a long line of stand-ups that I've seen anyway, to build a routine around the horrors of drive-in comedy, by which I mean that summer 2020 moment when, deep into COVID and desperate for gigs, stand-ups agreed to perform for audiences of cars, just cars, honking their horns for applause, activating their windscreen wipers for laughter, maybe. It was a very strange time. So anyway, all of this begs the question for me, as we may be emerging from pandemic and its associated conditions, what about lockdown era comedy is worth saving? That's my question. Has anything positive come out of these 18 months or so of closed clubs and cancelled tours and flailing new ways of delivering comedy to audiences? I'm asking this question in the same week that the online platform Next Up Comedy began live streaming regular gigs from the iconic Comedy Store venue, suggesting that live stream gigs of that nature, if not Zoom comedy in its purest form, is here to stay. It's a turnaround. I'm old enough to remember when they said stand-up didn't work on TV. Now we've gone the other way. Good luck finding a screen these days that doesn't have a stand-up comedian somewhere on it. So yeah, my question to the two of you and to anyone listening is, what do we feel about this new comedy ecology? Are we all digital now, and are the boundaries blurring between live and online comedians? Or are we returning to the point where the only handheld device that matters in comedy is an on-stage microphone? What are your thoughts, team? Where are we at?
I'm glad you just brought up TV stand-up, because I didn't even think of that. They've been filming live at the Apollo, haven't they, recently? One of my friends went to see it last week. And I suppose one of the questions, there are many questions in what you've brought up, but one of the questions is, like, what does the audience want from stand-up? And you're completely right. I never thought of this because it's so normal to me, but obviously watching TV stand-up, there is no interaction for the audience member. It's happened. That unpredictably of live comedy is gone. You're not going to get picked on by Scary MC. You're not going to have to quickly make up a job if you're in finance, which people should do because they get in trouble. So you've lost that, but there's still a huge audience, right? Like, that's what stand-ups kind of dream of doing, being on TV. So with the live stream, at least you can have, like, promoters did it in lots of different ways. I did a few Zoom gigs because I just done 2 live gigs. For me, I hadn't had enough of that kind of liveness to be like, oh great, I've got a set. This is, yeah, I had to really develop my material online, so I found it helpful. But promoters sort of worked out you can have a Zoom front row, so you hear laughter, and that's actually one better than TV, isn't it? Because you're getting that feedback. So today, I wasn't as against it as some people I've talked to who started in 2019. So they just got a year or 6 months in, and then it all went away. For me, I had 2, and those felt like a gift. And then I was like, right, well, I'm gonna have to do this for however long, or I could just leave it. For people whose income comes from comedy, it must have been really difficult. I'm not that person, so yeah, that must have been very tough.
Yeah, no, I hear you about how, like, I've been party to lots of conversations about digital theatre, as it happens, with one of my other hats on. And someone said to me the other day, in terms of like the definition of, if you watch a digital theatre show, why is it not just a film or a TV show or a piece of video art? And someone said to me, if the audience can still fuck it up, it's theatre. And that you can apply that to comedy, I suppose, is if there is still some genuine interactivity and indeed jeopardy, it's getting close to what we associate with live comedy. But yeah, close enough, question mark. Jamal, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm thinking back, and I definitely remember at the beginning of all of the lockdowns, there was a lot of negativity about Zoom gigs from both comedians and the press and people that attended shows. But I don't know if you guys had the same thing, but I noticed a little bit more positivity as things started to look like they might open up again. And it found like some people had started to find the good in Zoom gigs. That yes, they're quite awkward, and as a comic, you kind of have less power, and someone could be watching you and their TV or Netflix or anything else. But you had an opportunity to try new material. If you kind of leaned into the format, you could kind of get something from it and learn something from it. And I know a couple of people that did shows that were a little bit that were more suited to Zoom. So they had, you can do like slide backgrounds and, maybe do a little bit more storytelling. And I remember seeing one show where at the start, instead of waiting for everyone to enter like a work meeting, which sets a certain tone, the performance would already be happening, and they would pretend that you couldn't see them. And then, that was the bit at the beginning, and then they'd start the set eventually. But yeah, I know a couple of people who towards the end started to find some good in Zoom gigs, and some smaller acts that were happy to be able to reach international audiences and not to have to fight for theater space and things like that. So yeah, I can imagine some of those things staying, but I'm not sure I've heard as much of that positivity in recent months now that things are actually open. So yeah, so I'm not too sure how much will survive.
Yeah, no, before this chat, I went online to see which of those like more successful formats were still running, Comedy at the COVID Arms, the Kitty Pritchard McLean one, which, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't seem to be running any longer. It seems to have run until July and not still be doing so. And I know that Working from Home, the Just the Tonic one, which was a quite successful format, I gather. I think there's some ambition to maybe retain it in some shape or form. It doesn't seem to be a regular thing right now. So yeah, no, I too remember that period, and indeed, once or twice in reviewing these shows, expressed enough enthusiasm to think maybe there is a role for this in the post-pandemic period. Yeah, and certainly you've alluded to one of the big pro arguments, which is all to do with access. Access for audiences who might not otherwise be able to get to comedy, and access to larger or different types of audience for acts who might otherwise struggle to reach that kind of audience. So yeah, these are persuasive arguments, although sometimes I get anxious that this implication is that in some way, live comedy or indeed live theatre is in danger of being backed into a corner where by definition it's not accessible enough just by virtue of being in a specific place. So yeah, I think it's important to like keep fighting for like actual live performance to be as accessible as it possibly can, and not kind of surrender that accessibility initiative to Zoom stuff, because it's also like, what are you being given access to? I profoundly believe that the live gigs are like a richer and potentially more radical experience than what you're getting online. But yeah, do we think that's the case, that, that if they survive, it will be primarily for those reasons? Is there an artistic argument to be made for them, or a like richness of experience for comedians argument to be made for them?
So I think for comedians who are starting out and are not in big cities, it can be a good way to meet people. So I am in a big city. I'm in London, but obviously I couldn't go meet anyone. So this is my first year of comedy. Ideally, you are meeting people and meeting people you might write with, meeting like your allies, meeting your friends. And in 2020, I couldn't go outside and do that. So I was doing these comedy gyms, which Angel Comedy put on. And I'm sure there are other kinds of places where you can do writing prompts, write together. And for me, this is where I develop my material. Like I've got 10 minutes because I was in these writing gyms. You have a comedian who's probably a bit more experienced. They were doing writing prompts. So you get started. And then you're sort of throwing your comedy into the crowd, and people are very sort of positive, really supportive, and they're punching your jokes up for you. So you had this kind of writer's room-esque situation, but you weren't all writing to a common goal. And for me, like now I've met some of these people in real life, it's really funny because you're like, is this definitely the first time we've met, because you got to know them so well. But without that, and like anyone could join the Zoom from anywhere in the world, and it started becoming quite international. Without that, I really would have struggled, I think, to get my 10 minutes, which I then take to competitions and so on. And I don't know, I think for people who feel they're in a place like in a rural place or in a country where they don't have that access, it can mean we're missing out on that talent. And so if they can go and learn from people, go and share their sort of comedy knowledge and punch up other people's jokes, that is a good thing. I feel it was invaluable for me. I probably wouldn't have had as much motivation to carry on if I didn't do some Zoom gigs, do some of the comedy gyms, and feel like I was improving. I think if you feel like you're staying in the same place in your first year of comedy, it's much easier to think, well, why bother? Mm-hmm. So I will sound quite positive about some of the digital stuff. As someone who's going to festivals and things like that, I did get my show filmed at Camden Fringe. And so I'm just like, well, I've got that there. It's a big file, and I paid someone to film it, and I feel like it's the right thing to do. So it might be that I offer it as an online thing as well. But my brother, who hasn't seen the show, who lives in Bristol, and I haven't got any plans to go there anytime soon, although I'm up for it, he's kind of going, oh, can I watch it? But I do feel like I'd rather he saw it live. And there's no particular reason I don't talk about him in it. But there is something in me that's like, I want you to be sitting there and watching it because it will feel different. So I think that feeling and how the audience walk out feeling, that's still something you would probably prefer them to be there live and to make eye contact with you, to hear their laughter or not hear their laughter. That still feels like a better experience. And I'd still much rather he saw it live.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And one of the things that I've seen some critics write about is that when we watch kind of TV stand-up specials or like a Netflix stand-up special, that we don't realize just how directed they are, how much direction kind of shapes what we eventually see. And I've heard stories of stand-up specials that are kind of awful in the room, but are cut into something wonderful because they're thinking about the end product in a different way. And that, yeah, you made me think of that when talking about sort of filming your own show and then just dropping that into a format where people can view it after the fact may not work as well, or may not kind of transition as well. And that makes me think of the Next Up comedy thing, and how much work is going into kind of directing those things to create something that's meant to be consumed at home, rather than just taking a live event and being like, okay, we stream stuff now, so here you go. And I wonder, I don't know, but I'm curious how much they're thinking about that when they're still live streaming events or creating an online vault of live shows.
Yeah, no, I don't know the answer to that one, but yeah, I know. I think I can say without fear of contradiction that I'd rather be watching them at the Comedy Store than, with all due respect to Next Up Comedy, watching them on my laptop screen. But yeah, I mean, it's like what you say, Suchandrika. That's a revealing thing to think about, how you'd most rather your brother engage with the material. Finally, a stand-up comedian's element is, in the same way that a fish's element is water, is like in a room full of laughing people. I remember watching a Zoom comedy gig with Tony Law. I mean, say what you like about Tony Law, but the man likes an audience, knows how to play with an audience. You know, and he was going through the motions on Zoom, but you could see it behind his eyes. He didn't want to be there. That's not where he belonged. You know, we can't extrapolate all lessons about stand-up comedy from the mental health of Tony Law, but it did feel like I felt a kindred spirit on that particular occasion.
I'll take that yardstick. That's fine. I want him to be well.
Yeah, I hope he's well now. So I hope he's prancing across the stage somewhere now, celebrating the new normal. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure there will be lots to salvage from that bad period, and I had some good Zoom comedy experiences, but oh my goodness, am I delighted to be back in rooms with other people, making me laugh by laughing hard at themselves.
Brian, can I just ask you something? You mentioned earlier about being in live shows where people did a corner response almost with a sketch show catchphrase, and you weren't super into it. Mm-hmm. Is there a catchphrase, or is there a comedian who you would be like into that corner response thing? Because it sounds like a rock star having their song like sung back at them. That sounds like an amazing moment for the fan and for the star. And so is there a moment, and Jamal, this goes for you as well, is there like a comedian that you would be like, yeah, your catchphrase? Or I don't know if I've got one, but if that, I want to, because that feels like
it's a good
amazing feeling. I want to be that audience member. He's like, this is the best time of my life. And I want to have a fan like that eventually, guys. Just one fan will be fine.
I mean, I've been a fanboy to plenty of comedy in my time, but whether that would translate into like wanting to shout out the catchphrases in a live gig.
I suppose you can't, because you're the critic.
I definitely couldn't. If I did it while on duty, that would be curious, but never say never.
Yeah. Well, maybe, yeah, this is the comedians as rock stars thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the gigs I remember one or two gigs with the Mighty Boosh when it was like that, when they were like, really at the top of their, like, everyone under a certain age just idolized them. And there were a few gigs where it did feel more like a rock gig. There was no space for like spontaneity or comedy, really, just because it was just a great big loving. But yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Musical comedy as well, so it is memorable in that sense. Yeah, I love them. Yeah,
that's what you made me think of, musical comedy. I was thinking, well, that's the opportunity to sing along. But yeah, I suppose even the likes of Bo Burnham doesn't prepare his audience for the songs beforehand so they can repeat them back. And a lot of comedians seem to hate that. I was just listening to The History of Sketch with Keegan Michael Key.
Oh, yeah.
I read your review of it too, Brian. I think you make a very good point about his kind of sheer will to convince you of his case. I listened to it at 1.3 times normal speed, and it was even more powerful. But yeah, he talks about how people will come up to him and ask him to repeat certain catchphrases and then just fall over laughing, which it sounded like he secretly enjoyed.
Well, we should wind up, because I'm concerned that our esteemed editor Tom will have other work to do this afternoon. We were wondering if we're ever going to stop talking, but it's been great fun talking about these matters with you both. Have you got anything coming up the rest of the week, or before we speak again, comedy wise?
I probably will go to some live stuff, but after this conversation, I think I'm most excited about somehow getting access to Ted Lasso season 2, given the awards that it has won, and that there's a twist. And I did wonder, when is that show going to get a little bit darker or a little bit more into his mind, because the premise seemed that's sometimes simple. So yeah, I'm curious about that.
Oh, I can't wait until you do. It does feel earned, which is good as well. I always draw a blank when thinking about when I'm doing comedy. Let's just assume I have gigs. I hope I've booked some. But in terms of something you're going to see, I've got some tickets for Late Night MASH next week. So I haven't gone to see a TV thing being filmed in quite a long time. And obviously this is the Dave version of the MASH report, which I've watched the first 2 episodes of, and it seems very similar. It seems really fun. So that should be good. That will feel like, you just queue for that for like several hours. It's a whole night, isn't it? So yeah, that should be good.
As if Russell Brand wasn't a big enough fix of noughties era comedy, I've got to go and see Ricky Gervais later this week. So it's a must for fans of middle-aged white guys being hilarious.
Is it
Uh,
new material or?
No, it's well, actually, I suspect it will be, but it's the same. Formally, it's the same show, Supernature, I think it's called, that I reviewed him in 2019 performing. But 2.5 years and a lot of water under bridges has passed since then. So I imagine it will have evolved considerably. But yeah, all will be revealed at the Palladium this weekend. Yeah, and further to that, I shall be hitting up Suchandrika with loads of links to great Scottish comedy, because she implied in an email earlier that she hadn't seen Scottish, she hadn't watched many Scottish sitcoms recently. I take that as a personal challenge.
Good. Yeah, I was just, when I was watching Lady Baby, which is the most heartbreaking and hilarious. Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't hear those accents often enough, like in comedy. Accents are on the live circuit, because a lot of people come to Britain from other places because it's a good live comedy circuit here. Accents come up a lot with new comedians. They explain themselves a lot, and I always find that quite sad, that you have to explain away something so essential to you. But at the same time, I suppose it helps us understand. And yeah, I was just thinking, I tend to hear accents sound like me almost too often. So yeah, that is another good show.
Great. Well, thank you both for chatting. Looking forward to next time. And thank you all for listening. Similarly, looking forward to next time. We shall meet again soon. Cheerio for now.